At family dinner, my daughter-in-law came to me and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us tonight." The words hit me like ice water in July. By dessert, she was the one begging me to stay. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Evelyn Margaret Thompson, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in Chicago's Edgewater district, on the third floor of a red brick building that's seen better days. The stairs creak under my feet every morning when I climb down to get the mail, and they creak just the same when I climb back up, clutching the handrail my late husband Harold installed 40 years ago when we first moved here. Every evening, I wrap myself in the same worn shawl, the blue one with tiny roses that Harold bought me for our 25th anniversary. It still smells faintly of his pipe tobacco, even after all these years since he passed. I keep old photographs tucked in the pockets of my house coat, wrapped in faded ribbons that once were bright pink. Wedding photos, baby pictures, family gatherings when everyone still smiled at each other. I had hoped for warmth at family dinners. I had hoped for acceptance, for that feeling you get when you walk into a room and people's faces light up because you're there. But that October evening, stepping into my son Michael's pristine house in Lincoln Park, the air felt colder than the wind off Lake Michigan. The dining room was beautiful, crystal glasses catching the light from an expensive chandelier, white tablecloth pressed to perfection, the kind of silverware that requires careful polishing. But I felt like an intruder in my own family. The betrayal was already simmering before I even took off my coat. I could see it in the way my daughter-in-law Lisa glanced at her watch when I arrived exactly at 6, as requested. I could hear it in the way my son Michael cleared his throat when I asked if I could help with anything. And then Lisa approached me, her smile as fake as the expensive flowers on the table, leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive, and whispered those words that would echo in my mind for months. "Try not to embarrass us tonight." The pot roast sat untouched on my plate for most of the evening. My appetite had vanished. You see, for 37 years, I had been the backbone of this family. When Michael was born in 1974, Harold and I were just scraping by. Harold worked double shifts at the steel plant, and I cleaned office buildings downtown, taking the red line at 4 in the morning when the city was still dark and dangerous. We saved every penny so Michael could have what we never had: good schools, clean clothes, birthday parties with real cake instead of the boxed mix I grew up with. When Michael graduated from Northwestern with his business degree, Harold and I were so proud we cried during the ceremony. We had done it. We had given our son a better life. And when he met Lisa at that investment firm where they both worked, we welcomed her with open arms. She was sophisticated, educated, from a well-to-do family on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. We thought she would be good for him. I thought she would be good for us. But life has a way of testing your faith in people, doesn't it? In 2008, when the economy crashed like a house of cards, Michael lost his job. His savings evaporated faster than morning dew. The mortgage on their beautiful Lincoln Park house, the one with the 3-car garage and the marble countertops, became impossible to manage. Their credit cards were maxed out. Lisa was pregnant with their first child, and her attorney father had made it clear that helping them would set a dangerous precedent in their family. So they turned to us. Harold and I had been careful with our money. We had a modest retirement fund, enough to live comfortably in our little apartment, maybe take a small vacation once a year to visit Harold's sister in Milwaukee. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. We had planned for our golden years, imagining quiet evenings and maybe some traveling. Instead, we became a bank for our son's dreams. "Mom, Dad, we just need help with the mortgage for a few months," Michael said, sitting in our tiny kitchen, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. "Just until I find something permanent." A few months turned into 2 years. We gave them $47,000 of our retirement savings. I know the exact amount because I kept every receipt, every bank statement, written in my careful handwriting in a small ledger I still keep in my kitchen drawer. The money came from stocks my father had left me, from Harold's pension contributions, from the small inheritance we received when Harold's mother passed away. We didn't just give money. We gave everything. When Harold had his stroke in 2011, just 3 years after we had emptied our savings for Michael and Lisa, I became his full-time caregiver. The man who had once carried me over the threshold of this apartment could barely recognize me some days. He would wake up confused, frightened, calling for his mother who had been dead for 20 years. I bathed him. I fed him. I changed his clothes when he couldn't remember how buttons worked. I slept in the chair next to our bed because he was afraid of the dark and needed to know someone was there. The physical therapy appointments, the doctor visits, the medications that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, I managed it all. Did Michael and Lisa visit during those 3 years? Yes, they did. Every other Sunday, like clockwork. They would arrive at 2 in the afternoon and leave by 4:30, always with some excuse about dinner plans or Lisa's yoga class or little Emma needing her nap. They would sit in our living room, Michael scrolling through his phone while Lisa made polite conversation about the weather. "How are you holding up, Evelyn?" she would ask, but her eyes were always somewhere else, checking her manicure, glancing at her expensive watch, looking out the window at anything that wasn't my tired face and my husband's vacant stare. I would tell them about Harold's good days, about how he remembered our anniversary last week, about how he smiled when I played old jazz records. I would tell them about the bad days too, about how he didn't recognize me yesterday, about how he cried when the physical therapist came, about how scared I was of what tomorrow might bring. "That sounds really hard," Lisa would say, the same way you might comment on a mildly interesting news story. When Harold passed away in 2014, on a Tuesday morning in February when the snow was falling so hard I couldn't see the building across the street, I called Michael first. Before the funeral home, before the doctor, before anyone else. He was my only child, and I needed him. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he promised. He arrived 4 hours later, with Lisa and the children. By then, I had already handled everything: the funeral home arrangements, the death certificate, the lonely process of deciding what Harold should wear for his final journey. I had sat with my husband's body for those 4 hours, holding his hand and talking to him the way I had every morning for 43 years of marriage. At the funeral, Lisa wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but I never saw actual tears. The children, Emma, who was 4, and little James, who was barely 2, fidgeted in their expensive clothes while I held myself together through sheer willpower. After the service, after the small reception at the church basement where Harold's few remaining friends shared stories about his kindness and his terrible jokes, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's affairs," he said. "Lisa thinks it would be best if I helped you manage things from now on. You know, the insurance money, the apartment, all of that." I was so tired from grief I could barely stand, but something in his tone made me pay attention. "What do you mean, manage things?" "Well, you're alone now. And you're getting older. Lisa and I think it would be smart to simplify your finances. Maybe look into some investment opportunities. We know people who could help." The insurance money from Harold's policy was $63,000, everything we had left to ensure I could live independently for the rest of my life. Michael was suggesting I hand it over to them for management. "I think I can handle my own finances," I said quietly. His face changed then. The son who had hugged me after the service disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly right now. Grief does that to people. Lisa and I just want what's best for you." I said no. It was one of the hardest words I've ever spoken to my child, but I said it. From that moment, everything changed. The Sunday visits became monthly. Then they stopped altogether unless it was a holiday or someone's birthday. Phone calls came only when they needed something: someone to watch the children during a school break, someone to contribute to a family vacation fund, someone to help with unexpected expenses. I said yes to all of it because I was terrified of losing the only family I had left. When Emma started kindergarten at a private school that cost more than my yearly income, Michael called to ask if I could help with tuition. "It's just for this year, Mom. I'm expecting a promotion soon." I gave them $8,000 from Harold's insurance money. When Lisa wanted to renovate their kitchen because the granite countertops weren't the right shade of white, they needed a temporary loan. Just until the equity loan comes through. I gave them $12,000. When James needed speech therapy that their insurance wouldn't completely cover, when Emma wanted to take ballet lessons, when their car needed repairs, when Lisa's mother visited and they wanted to take her to expensive restaurants, every time, they turned to me. And every time, I said yes, because what else do you do when your only child asks for help? By 2018, Harold's insurance money was gone. My Social Security barely covered my rent and basic expenses. I was shopping at discount grocery stores, clipping coupons like my mother used to do during the Depression, wearing the same clothes I'd owned for a decade. But Michael's family was thriving. Lisa had left her job to be a full-time mother, which she claimed was the most important career choice she could make. They took vacations to Europe. They drove cars that cost more than I had ever made in a year. Emma was enrolled in French lessons and piano classes. James had every educational toy and electronic device available. And I lived on canned soup and bargain bread, proud that I had helped make their dreams possible. The first time I asked them for help in return, I had just turned 70. My arthritis was getting worse, and climbing those 3 flights of stairs to my apartment had become genuinely difficult. I had seen an advertisement for one of those stair lifts, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they could help me with the down payment. "Mom, those things are really expensive," Michael said when I brought it up during one of our rare phone conversations. "And honestly, if you're having trouble with stairs, maybe it's time to think about assisted living. Lisa and I have been talking, and we think it might be safer for you." assisted living. Where I would give up my independence, my memories, my connection to the life Harold and I had built together, so I could live in a small room surrounded by strangers. I'm not ready for that, I said. I just need some help with the stairs. Well, we can't really afford to help right now. Emma's tuition is going up next year, and we're trying to save for a vacation. Maybe you could apply for some kind of government assistance? Government assistance. After I had given them nearly $70,000 of my life savings. I didn't get the stair lift. I learned to take the stairs one at a time, holding the rail Harold had installed, resting on each landing when my knees screamed in protest. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the slow, creeping realization that I had become invisible to my own family. Birthdays passed without phone calls. Last year, when I turned 71, I woke up optimistic. I made myself a small breakfast, put on my nicest dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that Harold always said made my eyes look beautiful, and waited. I waited all day. At 7 in the evening, I called Michael. "Hi, honey," I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice light. "I was just wondering if you remembered what today was." There was a pause. I could hear Lisa in the background, asking who was on the phone. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. We've been so busy with Emma's recital and James's doctor appointment. Happy birthday. We'll make it up to you, I promise." They never did make it up to me. When I caught the flu last winter, the kind that leaves you so weak you can barely get out of bed to make tea, I called Michael on the second day. My fever was so high I was shaking, and I was scared. "Can you or Lisa maybe bring me some soup?" I asked. "Or just check on me? I don't think I should be driving to the store. Mom, we're all fighting something here too. Emma's got a cough, and Lisa doesn't want to risk getting whatever you have. Can you maybe order groceries online? Or call one of your neighbors?" I hung up and cried for the first time since Harold's funeral. Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment next door, a woman I barely knew except to say hello in the hallway, knocked on my door the next morning. She had heard me coughing through the thin walls and wanted to check on me. She brought homemade chicken soup and stayed to make sure I ate some. She didn't worry about catching my flu. She just saw someone who needed help. A stranger showed me more kindness in one morning than my own family had shown me in years. But the moment everything changed, the moment I finally understood how far I had fallen in their eyes, came 3 months ago. I was at my kitchen table, paying bills on a Saturday morning, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael, but it wasn't meant for me. I could tell because it started mid-conversation, and he was clearly responding to something Lisa had said. "She's getting harder to deal with. Lisa says she's becoming clingy and demanding. Maybe it's time to have that conversation about power of attorney. The lawyer said if we could prove she's not capable of managing her finances, we could get control of whatever's left. Dad's insurance money is mostly gone, but there's still the apartment equity and her social security. We need to start planning for our retirement too." My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. This was my son, the child I had carried for 9 months, the baby I had nursed and rocked and sung to sleep for countless nights, the boy I had helped with homework and driven to baseball practice and worried about through every fever and broken bone and teenage heartbreak. This was my son, planning to have me declared incompetent so he could control what little money I had left. I read the message 3 more times, thinking maybe I had misunderstood. But the words didn't change. My own child was discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, an obstacle standing between him and his financial security. I set the phone down on the table and walked to my bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was tired, older than I felt inside, wearing a house dress that had seen better days. But her eyes weren't empty. They were angry. "You deserve more than this," I whispered to my reflection. "You deserve more than scraps of pity and fake politeness and secret meetings about your incompetence." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that text message, about the casual way they had dismissed my worth as a human being. I got up and made tea, Earl Grey, the good kind I saved for special occasions, and sat in Harold's old chair by the window. From our apartment, you can see a slice of Lake Michigan between the buildings. Harold used to sit in this same chair every morning, watching the sun come up over the water, saying it was the best free entertainment in the city. That night, watching the moon reflect on the waves, I made a decision. I was done being their safety net. I was done being their convenient source of emergency funds. I was done accepting crumbs of affection in exchange for my dignity. But first, I had to know for sure what I was dealing with. The next Monday, I took the red line downtown to the law office that had sent Michael that letter about my late husband's estate, the letter I wasn't supposed to know about. I had found it by accident when I was helping Lisa clean out their junk drawer during my last visit. It was tucked under a stack of Emma's school papers, and the letter had caught my attention because it had my name on it. The lawyer, a young woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake, explained that Michael had contacted them about contesting Harold's will. He claimed there were irregularities in how the insurance money had been handled, and he wanted to explore options for recovering funds that should have been part of the estate. "Ma'am," she said gently, "your husband's insurance policy was payable directly to you as the named beneficiary. There's nothing to contest. But your son seemed very concerned about your ability to manage such a large sum of money. He suggested that you might be experiencing some cognitive decline." Cognitive decline. My son had told a stranger that I was losing my mind. Did he provide any evidence of this supposed decline? I asked. "No, ma'am. And frankly, speaking with you now, you seem perfectly sharp to me. But I wanted you to know what was being suggested." I thanked her and left, but my head was spinning. Michael hadn't just been careless with that text message. He had been actively working to undermine my independence. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through all my financial records, every bank statement and receipt and ledger entry. I calculated exactly how much money I had given Michael and Lisa over the past decade. The number was staggering. $87,432. Nearly $90,000 of my life savings, gone to support a family that now questioned my mental competence. I sat in my kitchen with those papers spread across the table like evidence in a trial, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt hatred toward my own child. Not disappointment. Not frustration. Actual hatred. And then I felt something else, something I hadn't experienced in so long I almost didn't recognize it. I felt powerful. The dinner invitation came a week later. Lisa called on a Tuesday evening, her voice artificially bright. "Evelyn, we're having a small family dinner this Sunday. Just us and the kids. Michael thought it would be nice to have you over." "That sounds lovely," I said, though my stomach was already churning. "Great. 6 o'clock. And Evelyn?" Her voice took on that careful tone I had learned to dread. "We're having some friends over too. The Whitneys from Michael's office. They're very sophisticated people. I hope you understand." I understood perfectly. I was being told to behave myself in front of company. "I'll do my best not to embarrass anyone," I said. If Lisa caught the edge in my voice, she didn't acknowledge it. "Wonderful. See you Sunday." I spent the rest of the week planning. Not for the dinner, I had attended enough of their dinners to know what to expect. I was planning for what would come after. On Friday, I visited my bank and moved my remaining savings, the small amount I had left from Social Security and a tiny pension from my old cleaning job, into an account that only I could access. I made copies of every document related to the money I had given Michael and Lisa. I wrote out a timeline of every request for help, every promise to pay me back, every casual dismissal of my needs. On Saturday, I went shopping. Not at the discount store where I usually bought generic brands and marked down produce. I went to the Whole Foods in Lincoln Park, the one Lisa shopped at, and I bought ingredients for a dessert. A real dessert, the kind I used to make when Michael was young and money wasn't something we worried about every day. I was going to make Harold's favorite chocolate cake, the one with the bourbon frosting that took me 3 hours to prepare properly. If this was going to be my last family dinner, I was going to contribute something meaningful. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October day that makes you want to stay inside with a good book and hot tea. Instead, I put on my best dress, the black one with the silver buttons that I had bought for Harold's funeral and never worn since. I did my hair carefully, pinning it back the way Harold always liked. I even put on lipstick, the coral shade that made me feel younger. At 5:30, I carefully placed my chocolate cake in its carrier and walked to the bus stop. The number 36 would take me from Edgewater to Lincoln Park, a 40-minute journey through neighborhoods that got progressively more expensive with each stop. Michael and Lisa's house sat on a tree-lined street where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every car in every driveway cost more than most people make in a year. The house itself was a testament to their success, 3 stories of red brick and white trim, with a front porch that looked like something from a magazine. I climbed the front steps, my cake carrier in one hand and my purse clutched tightly in the other. Before I could knock, the door opened, and Lisa appeared in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Evelyn," she said, her smile bright and empty. "Right on time." I stepped into their foyer, with its gleaming hardwood floors and crystal chandelier, and immediately felt underdressed despite my efforts. The house smelled like expensive candles and wine, and I could hear voices from the dining room, the sophisticated friends I was supposed to impress. "I brought dessert," I said, holding up the cake carrier. "Oh, how thoughtful," Lisa said, though her tone suggested it was anything but a welcome surprise. "I'll just put this in the kitchen. We already have dessert planned, but maybe we can save this for later." My cake, the one I had spent 3 hours making with ingredients that cost me $60 I couldn't really afford, was being dismissed as an afterthought. "Evelyn, before we join the others," Lisa said, moving closer to me in the foyer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive that made my nose itch. Close enough that her voice could be a whisper without anyone else hearing. "Try not to embarrass us tonight." Those 7 words hit me like a physical blow. All the pretense, all the fake politeness, all the careful management of my presence in their lives, it all crystallized in that moment. I wasn't a beloved grandmother being invited to dinner. I was a potential embarrassment being warned to stay in line. I looked into Lisa's eyes, those cold blue eyes that had never, not once, looked at me with genuine warmth, and I saw exactly what she thought of me. I was the poor relation, the weak link, the elderly woman who might say something awkward or wear something inappropriate or otherwise remind their sophisticated friends that wealth and status weren't inherited traits. I understand, I said quietly. Good, Lisa said, her smile returning. Now let's go meet everyone. The dining room was a masterpiece of entertaining perfection. The table was set with china so delicate it looked like it might break if you breathed on it. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the chandelier. 2 couples were already seated, along with Michael and the children. Everyone, this is Michael's mother, Evelyn, Lisa announced as we entered the room. The introductions were polite but brief. David and Margaret Whitney, he was a senior partner at Michael's firm, she was on the board of some charity. Robert and Catherine Chen, she was a federal judge, he was a renowned surgeon. The kind of people who belonged in houses like this, with careers that commanded respect and incomes that bought them beautiful things. And then there was me. Evelyn Thompson, widow, former office cleaner, current recipient of Social Security benefits, wearing a 4-year-old dress and shoes that needed resoling. I took my seat at the far end of the table, next to Emma and across from little James. The children, at least, seemed genuinely happy to see me. Emma whispered that she had learned a new song on the piano, and James showed me his loose tooth with the kind of pride only a 6-year-old can muster. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They discussed vacation destinations I could never afford to visit, restaurants I had never heard of, schools that cost more than I had ever made in a year. They debated the merits of different investment strategies, complaining about capital gains taxes and the difficulty of finding good domestic help. I sat quietly, cutting my food into small pieces and listening to my son navigate this world with practiced ease. This was Michael's life now, a life where money wasn't something you worried about but something you managed strategically. Where dinner parties required sophisticated conversation and carefully curated guest lists. Where his mother was a liability to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. Evelyn, you're very quiet tonight, Margaret Whitney said during a lull in conversation. Her tone was kind, but I could sense the underlying curiosity. Lisa tells me you live in Edgewater. Such a diverse neighborhood. Diverse? The polite way of saying poor. Yes, I've lived there for over 40 years, I said. My husband and I raised Michael there. How lovely that you've stayed in the same place all these years, Catherine Chen said. It must be so comforting to have that kind of stability. Before I could respond, Lisa jumped in. Actually, we've been trying to convince Evelyn that it might be time for a change. The neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be, and those stairs are getting harder for her to manage. There it was. The subtle manipulation in front of witnesses. The suggestion that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions about where to live. Moving can be such a big adjustment at any age, David Whitney said diplomatically. But there are some wonderful senior communities in the area now. Much more convenient. I'm sure there are, I said carefully. But I'm not ready to give up my independence just yet. The conversation moved on, but I caught the look that passed between Lisa and Michael. This dinner wasn't just about showing me off to their friends. It was about building a case for why I needed their intervention in my life. As the evening progressed, I watched my son laugh at jokes I didn't understand, discuss business deals that involved more money than I could comprehend, plan family vacations that would cost more than my yearly income. This was the life my sacrifices had bought him. This was the success I had helped make possible. And I was happy for him. Truly. I wanted my child to have a better life than Harold and I had been able to provide for ourselves. But I wasn't prepared for how completely he would leave me behind. During the main course, some kind of fish that I couldn't identify, prepared with sauces that probably had French names, Emma started telling everyone about a school project she was working on about family history. I have to interview someone old about what life was like before, she said, her voice bright with excitement. Grandma Evelyn, you're really old. Can you tell everyone about the olden days? The table went quiet. Lisa's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Michael's face turned red. Emma, that's not polite, Lisa said quickly. Grandma Evelyn isn't that old. But Emma, bless her heart, wasn't finished. But she is old, Mommy. She told me she was born in 1951. That's like, a million years ago. And she lived in the same apartment forever, and she used to ride the bus everywhere, and she worked cleaning offices when Daddy was little because they didn't have much money. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma had just announced to these successful, wealthy people that I was not just old, but poor. That their sophisticated host, Michael, had come from humble beginnings. That his mother was a woman who had cleaned their offices for a living. That's very interesting, Emma, Margaret Whitney said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Yes, I said, finding my voice at last. I did clean offices. Including some in your firm's building, Mr. Whitney. I worked the night shift for 15 years, taking care of the spaces where important people like you made important decisions. Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Michael was staring at his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. And you know what I learned in all those years of cleaning up after successful people? I continued, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I learned that we all leave the same kinds of messes behind. Coffee rings on expensive desks. Crumbs on designer furniture. Trash that needs emptying regardless of how much money the person makes who fills the bin. Grandma, you're so smart, James said, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, reaching over to pat his hand. Your grandmother has learned a lot of things over the years. The conversation limped through the rest of dinner, with Lisa working overtime to steer topics away from anything that might remind their guests of my existence. When it came time for dessert, she served an elaborate tiramisu that had clearly been purchased from an expensive bakery. My homemade chocolate cake remained in the kitchen, forgotten. As the guests prepared to leave, making polite sounds about what a lovely evening it had been, I excused myself to use the bathroom. But instead of going upstairs, I slipped into the kitchen to retrieve my cake. It was sitting on the counter, still in its carrier, untouched and unacknowledged. I could have left it there. I could have let Lisa dispose of it quietly, the way she had disposed of my dignity all evening. Instead, I picked up the cake and walked back into the dining room, where the guests were putting on their coats and saying their goodbyes. Before everyone leaves, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, I'd like to share something. All conversation stopped. Lisa went rigid. Michael looked terrified. I made this cake, I said, setting the carrier on the dining table. It's my late husband's favorite recipe, chocolate with bourbon frosting. It's the same cake I made for every one of Michael's birthdays when he was growing up, when we couldn't afford to buy fancy desserts from bakeries. I opened the carrier and revealed the cake. It wasn't as perfectly decorated as the tiramisu, but it was beautiful in its own way, rich and dark and made with love. I wanted to contribute something meaningful to this dinner, I continued, cutting generous slices and placing them on the expensive china plates. Something that represents where this family came from, before all the success and sophisticated friends and expensive houses. The guests accepted their slices politely, probably afraid to refuse. But when Margaret Whitney took her first bite, her eyes widened with genuine pleasure. This is extraordinary, she said. You made this from scratch? Yes, I said. The same way I made everything when Michael was young. We didn't have much money for store-bought conveniences, so I learned to make things myself. This recipe took me years to perfect. It's absolutely delicious, David Whitney added. The bourbon flavor is incredible. Even Catherine Chen and her husband were nodding appreciatively. You could sell cakes like this, Robert said. This is restaurant quality. I saw something flicker in Lisa's eyes, surprise, maybe even a grudging respect. For a moment, I wasn't just the embarrassing mother-in-law. I was a skilled baker who had impressed her sophisticated friends. Thank you, I said simply. I learned a long time ago that you don't need expensive ingredients to create something beautiful. You just need patience, practice, and love. The guests left with genuine praise for the cake, several of them asking if I would consider making cakes for their own dinner parties. Lisa walked them to the door, accepting compliments about her talented mother-in-law with a tight smile. When the front door closed and it was just family left in the dining room, the atmosphere changed immediately. Mom, what was that about? Michael asked, his voice low and strained. What was what about? I replied, beginning to clear the dessert plates. You know what? The whole speech about where we came from. About cleaning offices and not having money. You made everyone uncomfortable. I set down the plates and looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 49 years old, successful and well-dressed and living a life most people could only dream of. But in that moment, all I could see was the scared little boy who used to wake up from nightmares and crawl into bed between Harold and me. I made them uncomfortable. I asked quietly. Or I made you uncomfortable? Lisa returned from seeing the guests out, her face flushed with what I assumed was embarrassment. Evelyn, I don't think you understand how important tonight was. David Whitney is being considered for the managing partner position, and his opinion of Michael could affect his career prospects. And you think my presence hurt those prospects? I think your stories about the past weren't necessary, Lisa said carefully. These people don't need to know about your previous jobs or our financial history. You mean they don't need to know that your husband came from a working-class family? That his success was built on the sacrifices of people who cleaned offices for a living? That's not what I meant, Lisa said, but her tone suggested it was exactly what she meant. Then what did you mean when you told me not to embarrass you tonight? The question hung in the air like smoke. Michael and Lisa exchanged glances, and I could see them trying to decide how much truth they were willing to admit to. I just wanted tonight to go smoothly, Lisa said finally. These situations can be delicate. Delicate, I repeated. Is that what I am now? A delicate situation to be managed? Emma and James had been listening to this conversation with the wide-eyed attention that children bring to adult drama they don't understand. I could see them looking back and forth between their parents and me, trying to figure out why everyone seemed angry. Maybe we should talk about this privately, Michael said, glancing at the children. No, I said, my voice stronger than it had been all evening. I think we should talk about this right here, right now, in front of everyone. I walked over to where my purse sat on the side table and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were copies of all the financial records I had compiled, every loan I had made, every request I had fulfilled, every promise that had been broken. I want to show you something, I said, spreading the papers on the dining table where moments before we had shared cake and false pleasantries. These are records of every dollar I've given to this family over the past 10 years. Lisa's face went white. Michael took a step backward. $87,432, I said, reading from my calculations. That's how much of my life savings I've contributed to your success. Your house down payment. Your children's private school tuition. Your kitchen renovation. Your car repairs. Your vacations. Mom, you don't have to, Michael started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. That money represented my security, my independence, my ability to live with dignity in my old age. I gave it freely because I loved you and wanted to help you build a good life. I pulled out another document, the text message Michael had accidentally sent me, printed out in his own words. But apparently, my generosity has been mistaken for incompetence, I continued. According to this message, I'm becoming clingy and demanding, and you've been discussing having me declared mentally unfit so you can control my remaining assets. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Is that true, Michael? I asked. Have you been planning to have your own mother declared incompetent? My son's face crumbled. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to confess his mistakes with tears streaming down his cheeks. Mom, it's not like that, he said. We've just been worried about you. Living alone at your age, managing your finances by yourself. We thought maybe it would be better if you controlled my money the way you've controlled everything else about our relationship. That's not fair, Lisa interjected. We've never controlled anything. You've always been free to make your own choices. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Free to make my own choices? When was the last time I was invited to a family dinner without conditions? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing, not because you needed something? When was the last time you treated me like a valued member of this family instead of an obligation to be managed? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the truth. I have been nothing but generous with you, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I gave you money when you needed it. I babysat your children when you wanted a night out. I listened to your problems and offered advice when you asked for it. I made excuses for your neglect and forgave your indifference. I picked up one of the financial documents and held it up. But this stops now. This pattern of taking my money and dismissing my worth ends tonight. Mom, please, Michael said, and for the first time all evening, he sounded like he actually cared about my feelings. We never meant to make you feel unappreciated. We love you. Do you? I asked. Because love isn't just words, Michael. Love is actions. Love is respect. Love is treating someone with dignity even when they can't do anything for you in return. I began gathering up my papers, folding them carefully and putting them back in my purse. I want you to understand something, I said, looking directly at both Michael and Lisa. I am 72 years old. I am not wealthy, and I am not powerful in the ways this world typically measures those things. But I am not helpless, and I am not incompetent, and I will not be treated as if I am. Of course not, Lisa said quickly. We never thought. Yes, you did, I said, cutting her off. You've thought exactly that for years. I've been your emergency fund, your convenient babysitter, your obligatory dinner guest to be managed and controlled. But I have never been your equal. Emma, who had been quietly listening to this entire conversation, suddenly spoke up. Grandma, are you not going to come to dinner anymore? My heart broke a little at the genuine concern in her voice. These children, my grandchildren, were innocent victims of their parents' behavior. They loved me simply and purely, the way children love before they learn that love can be conditional. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. That depends on whether your parents want me here as your grandmother or as someone who might embarrass them. I want you here as my grandma, James said, his 6-year-old logic cutting through all the adult complications. You make the best cookies and you tell good stories and you always hug me when I'm sad. And I always will, I promised him. No matter what happens between the grown-ups, I will always love you and Emma more than all the stars in the sky. But then I turned back to Michael and Lisa, and my expression hardened. However, I said, my relationship with your parents is going to change. I will no longer be providing financial assistance for any reason. I will no longer be available for last-minute babysitting when it's convenient for you. And I will no longer attend family gatherings where I'm treated as a potential embarrassment rather than a beloved family member. You can't be serious, Lisa said. You're going to punish the children because of some misunderstanding? I'm not punishing anyone, I replied. I'm setting boundaries. Something I should have done years ago. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was trying to work through a problem. Mom, I think you're overreacting, he said finally. Maybe we haven't been as attentive as we should have been, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Family is complicated. Relationships take work from both sides. You're absolutely right, I said. Relationships do take work from both sides. But for the past 10 years, I've been doing all the work while you've been doing all the taking. I walked over to where Emma and James were sitting, both of them looking confused and a little scared by the adult drama unfolding around them. I love you both very much, I said, giving each of them a hug. And I hope I'll see you again soon. But next time, it will be on terms that respect everyone involved. Grandma, are you mad at us? Emma asked, her eyes wide with worry. No, sweetheart, I said, smoothing her hair back from her face. I'm not mad at you at all. Sometimes grown-ups need to have difficult conversations so that everyone can be happier. That's all this is. I straightened up and looked at Michael and Lisa one more time. I'm going home now, I said. When you're ready to treat me with the respect that 49 years of being your mother has earned, you know where to find me. I picked up my purse and my empty cake carrier and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations between Michael and Lisa, but I didn't turn around. At the front door, I paused and looked back at the dining room where my family was clustered around the table that still held the remnants of our difficult evening. One more thing, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the house. The next time you have sophisticated friends over for dinner, you might want to remember that the woman who raised your successful husband, who sacrificed her own comfort so you could have yours, who taught your children their first songs and held them through their first fevers, that woman is not an embarrassment. She's the foundation everything else was built on. I opened the front door and stepped out into the October night. The air was cold and clean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe deeply. The bus ride home gave me plenty of time to think about what had just happened. As we rolled through the neighborhoods that got progressively less expensive with each stop, I replayed the evening in my mind. Had I been too harsh? Had I overreacted to Lisa's whispered warning and the subsequent dismissal of my contribution to the dinner? But then I remembered the text message about having me declared incompetent. I remembered the lawyer's report about Michael questioning my mental capacity. I remembered years of being treated like a convenient resource rather than a valued person. No. I hadn't been too harsh. If anything, I had been too patient for too long. When I finally climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, taking my time, resting on each landing, but making it under my own power, I felt different. Lighter, somehow. As if I had been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there until I finally set it down. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Harold's old chair by the window. The lake was dark except for the city lights reflecting on its surface, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the rumble of the L train carrying people home from their Sunday evening activities. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe Michael had realized the magnitude of what had happened and was reaching out to apologize. But it was just a notification from my bank about my account balance. The savings account I had protected from Michael's schemes still held enough money for me to live independently, modestly but comfortably, for several more years. I was going to be okay. For the first time in a decade, I was going to be okay on my own terms. The next few days passed quietly. I half expected Michael to call, to try to smooth things over with the kind of surface-level apology that had become standard in our relationship. But my phone remained silent. Lisa didn't reach out either, which didn't surprise me. She had never been the one to initiate contact with me. All communication went through Michael, keeping her hands clean of direct manipulation. By Thursday, I was beginning to wonder if I had miscalculated. Maybe they were so offended by my behavior at dinner that they were prepared to cut me off entirely. The thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. Despite everything, they were my only family. But then I remembered something my mother used to say when I was young and dealing with playground bullies. People treat you exactly as well as you allow them to treat you, Evelyn. If you accept crumbs, that's all they'll ever offer you. Mama had been dead for 20 years, but her wisdom still rang true. On Friday morning, Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on my door with a plate of homemade tamales and a concerned expression. Evelyn, honey, are you doing okay? She asked as I invited her in for coffee. You seem different this week. Quieter, maybe, but also. I don't know how to explain it. Like you're carrying yourself taller. I smiled at her observation. I think I am carrying myself taller, Maria. I had a difficult conversation with my family on Sunday, and I'm still processing how I feel about it. Do you want to talk about it? She asked, settling into Harold's chair with her coffee mug cradled in weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Maria Rodriguez was 78 years old, a widow like me, but her experience of family was completely different. Her 3 daughters and 2 sons visited regularly, called frequently, and treated her like the cherished matriarch she was. Her grandchildren spent weekends at her apartment, filling it with laughter and Spanish chatter and the kind of organic joy that can't be manufactured. I found myself telling her everything: the years of financial support, the gradual erosion of respect, the text message about my supposed incompetence, the whispered warning at dinner, and my decision to finally set boundaries. Maria listened without interruption, her dark eyes growing increasingly indignant as my story unfolded. Ay, Dios mío, she said when I finished. Evelyn, I had no idea. You always spoke so proudly of Michael's success, of how well the family was doing. I never realized the cost to you. I didn't want anyone to know, I admitted. I was ashamed, I think. Ashamed that my own son would treat me that way, and ashamed that I allowed it to continue for so long. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Maria said firmly. You are a good mother who made sacrifices for your child's happiness. That's not shameful, that's love. But love should flow both ways in a family. She reached across the small space between our chairs and patted my hand. In my culture, she continued, we have a saying, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. Respect for the rights of others is peace. Your son and his wife forgot to respect your rights as a person, as their elder, as someone who deserved gratitude instead of manipulation. I just don't know what happens now, I said. I love those grandchildren so much. The thought of losing them. You won't lose them if your son has any sense, Maria said. But even if you do, temporarily, you'll have your dignity back. And sometimes, Mija, dignity is more important than peace. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself, not for groceries or necessities, but for something that would make me happy. I took the Red Line downtown to the Art Institute of Chicago, a place I had always wanted to visit but never seemed to find the time for. The admission fee was something I would have considered frivolous just a week ago, money that should be saved for emergencies or family needs. But I paid it without hesitation and spent 3 hours wandering through galleries filled with beauty I had never taken the time to appreciate. Standing in front of a painting by Edward Hopper, a lonely woman in a window, lit by the warm glow of an interior light, I felt a kinship with the figure on the canvas. She looked solitary but not defeated. Independent rather than abandoned. Maybe this was what I was becoming, not a woman without family, but a woman who didn't need family validation to define her worth. On my way out of the museum, I stopped at the gift shop and bought myself something I had been wanting for months, a set of high-quality watercolor paints and brushes. Harold used to paint as a hobby when we were young, before work and responsibilities filled up all his time. His supplies were still in our bedroom closet, untouched since his death. Maybe it was time for me to try creating something beautiful. The weekend passed peacefully. I set up a small easel by the window in my living room and tried my hand at painting the view of the lake. My first attempts were clumsy, but there was something deeply satisfying about mixing colors and watching shapes emerge from blank paper. For the first time in months, I didn't check my phone obsessively or wonder what Michael and his family were doing. I was completely absorbed in my own activity, my own small world of discovery. Monday morning brought the first crack in the silence. Emma called. Not Michael or Lisa, but my 8-year-old granddaughter, using her mother's phone to reach out to the grandmother who had walked out of their lives 6 days earlier. Grandma Evelyn? Her voice was small and uncertain through the phone speaker. Are you still mad at us? My heart nearly broke at the question. Oh, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. I could never be mad at you or James. Never. But Mommy said you might not want to see us anymore because we're not sophisticated enough for you. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of Lisa's manipulation. She had twisted the entire situation, making herself and Michael the victims of my unreasonable behavior. Emma, can you listen to me very carefully? I asked. Your grandmother loves you more than all the stars in the sky and all the fish in the ocean. Nothing your mommy or daddy could do would ever change that love, and nothing you could do would ever make me not want to see you. Then why did you leave on Sunday? Why did everyone look so sad after you were gone? How do you explain adult family dynamics to an 8-year-old? How do you tell a child that her parents have been treating you badly without damaging her relationship with them? Sometimes grown-ups need to have difficult conversations about how to treat each other with respect, I said finally. Your mommy and daddy and I need to work out some problems about how we communicate with each other. But you'll still be my grandma? I will always be your grandma, I promised. Always and forever, no matter what. Can you come to my piano recital next Friday? I've been practicing the song you taught me, the one about the mockingbird. My throat tightened with emotion. 6 months ago, during one of my rare visits, I had taught Emma an old lullaby that my mother had sung to me. She had been struggling with a difficult piece her piano teacher had assigned, and I suggested we work on something simpler and more fun. Listen to the mockingbird, listen to the mockingbird still singing o'er her grave, I had sung in my wavering but still tuneful voice, and Emma had picked up the melody immediately. I would love to come to your recital, I said. But I'll need to talk to your mommy and daddy first, to make sure it's okay with them. It has to be okay, Emma said with the fierce certainty of childhood. You're my grandma and it's my recital and I want you there. After Emma hung up, after Lisa presumably took the phone away from her, I sat in my living room staring at my half-finished painting and thinking about the impossible situation I found myself in. I had drawn a line in the sand with Michael and Lisa, demanding to be treated with respect. But in doing so, I had potentially cut myself off from Emma and James, who were innocent of their parents' behavior and genuinely loved me. Was my dignity worth losing my grandchildren? The question haunted me for the rest of the day. Tuesday brought another phone call, this time from Michael himself. Mom, we need to talk, he said without preamble when I answered. Yes, we do, I agreed. Can you come over for dinner tonight? Just family, no one else. Will I be welcome there? I asked pointedly. Or will I be warned not to embarrass anyone? There was a long pause. Mom, I think we all said things on Sunday that we regret. Maybe we can start over. Start over. As if years of disrespect could be erased by a single conversation. What about Emma's recital on Friday? I asked. She called me yesterday and asked me to attend. Another pause. Lisa and I talked about that. We think it would be best if you came. Emma has been asking about you constantly. So they needed me to manage their daughter's emotional state. Once again, I was being called upon to serve a function in their family dynamic. But this time, the function wasn't financial. It was about love, genuine love between a grandmother and her grandchild. Maybe that was worth swallowing some pride. I'll come to dinner tonight, I said. But Michael, some things are going to be different going forward. I hope you understand that. I know, Mom. We'll talk about it tonight. I spent the afternoon preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I dressed carefully, not in my best clothes, because I wasn't trying to impress anyone, but in clothes that made me feel confident and comfortable. I brought a small gift for each of the children, new crayons for James and a simple necklace for Emma, because my relationship with them was separate from whatever problems I had with their parents. This time, when I knocked on the front door, Michael answered it himself. He looked tired, older than he had just a week ago. Hi, Mom, he said, and for the first time in months, his greeting sounded genuinely warm. Hello, Michael, I replied. The house felt different too. Less like a showplace and more like a home where real people lived with real problems they were trying to solve. Lisa was in the kitchen, cooking what smelled like my grandmother's pot roast recipe, the one I had taught her during the early years of their marriage when she was still pretending to be interested in family traditions. Evelyn, she said when I appeared in the doorway. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, I replied formally. The children's reaction was completely different from their parents' careful courtesy. Emma ran straight into my arms with the kind of pure joy that reminded me why grandchildren are such a blessing. James was right behind her, chattering about a tooth he had lost and the dollar the tooth fairy had left under his pillow. During dinner, the conversation was careful but not hostile. We talked about the children's school activities, about the weather, about neutral topics that didn't touch on the difficult issues between us. But after the children were sent upstairs to do homework and the three of us were left alone at the dining room table, the real conversation began. Mom, Michael said, I owe you an apology. Yes, you do, I agreed, not making it easy for him. That text message you saw? I never meant for you to see that. But more importantly, I never should have written it in the first place. What about the meeting with the lawyer? The questions about my mental competence? Michael's face flushed red. I was scared, okay? You're getting older, you're living alone, and I was worried about what would happen if something happened to you. The lawyer suggested that having power of attorney might be a good precaution, and I thought maybe if I could demonstrate that you needed help managing your finances. You thought you could manipulate the legal system to gain control of my money, I said bluntly. It wasn't about the money, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Michael, I said gently, we both know it was partly about the money. You've been counting on my resources as backup for your lifestyle for so long that you couldn't imagine a scenario where they weren't available to you. Lisa, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. Evelyn, I think we've all made mistakes in how we've handled family finances. But we never meant to make you feel taken advantage of. What did you mean to make me feel, Lisa? I asked, turning to face her directly. When you told me not to embarrass you in front of your friends, what was I supposed to feel? She looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair and avoiding my eyes. I was nervous about the dinner party, she said finally. David Whitney is very important to Michael's career, and I wanted everything to be perfect. And you thought my presence would make it imperfect? I thought. I thought you might mention things that would be awkward to explain. Things like the fact that your husband grew up poor? That his mother worked as a cleaning woman? That your success was built on the sacrifices of working-class people? It's not that simple, Lisa said defensively. Actually, it is that simple, I replied. You were ashamed of where Michael came from, and by extension, you were ashamed of me. Rather than owning your family history with pride, you wanted to hide it away like a dirty secret. Michael had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. Mom, that's not fair to Lisa. She's never said anything negative about our background. She didn't have to say anything, Michael. Her actions spoke loud enough. I pulled out the folder of financial records I had brought with me. Let's talk about money, I said, spreading the papers on the table. Over the past 10 years, I have given you nearly $90,000 of my retirement savings. That money was meant to ensure my security in old age, but I shared it freely because I wanted to help you build a good life for your family. Both Michael and Lisa stared at the documents as if seeing them for the first time. I never asked you to pay me back, I continued. I never charged interest or demanded a repayment schedule. I gave it as a gift, the way parents do for children they love. Mom, we're grateful for everything you've done, Michael started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish, I said. In return for that financial support, I expected basic respect and consideration. I expected to be included in family activities not as an obligation but as a welcome participant. I expected my opinions to be valued and my feelings to be considered. I looked directly at Lisa. What I didn't expect was to be treated like a potential embarrassment who needed to be managed and controlled. The silence that followed was heavy with guilt and recognition. We can't undo the hurt feelings, I said finally, but we can decide how to move forward. Here are my terms for continuing to have a relationship with this family. I had thought carefully about this conversation, and I knew exactly what I needed to say. First, there will be no more financial requests. My remaining savings are for my own security, and I will not be lending, giving, or investing any more money in your lifestyle choices. Michael nodded slowly, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Second, I want to be included in family activities as a valued participant, not as someone who needs to be warned about proper behavior. If you're ashamed of my presence, then I won't inflict it on you. Mom, we're not ashamed of you, Michael said. Then prove it, I replied. Treat me like someone whose company you enjoy, not like someone whose behavior you need to monitor. Lisa was staring at her hands, but I could see she was listening intently. Third, my relationship with Emma and James is separate from whatever problems we have as adults. I will always be their grandmother, and I expect to be able to maintain that relationship regardless of any disagreements between us. Of course, Michael said immediately. They love you, Mom. We would never interfere with that. And finally, I said, I want honest communication from now on. No more discussions about my mental competence behind my back. No more manipulation through lawyers or financial advisors. If you have concerns about my well-being, bring them to me directly. I gathered up my papers and put them back in their folder. Those are my conditions for moving forward, I said. If you can accept them, then we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. If you can't accept them, then we'll need to limit our contact to occasions that directly involve the children. Michael and Lisa exchanged glances across the table. I could see them having an entire conversation with their eyes, weighing the cost of my demands against the value of maintaining a relationship with me. Finally, Michael spoke. Mom, I accept your conditions. All of them. You're right, we haven't treated you with the respect you deserve, and I want to do better. Lisa? I asked. She looked up from her hands, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. I owe you an apology too, she said quietly. I have been ashamed, not of you personally, but of... I don't know how to explain it. I grew up in a world where certain things were important, appearances, social status, the right kind of connections. I thought those things were important for Michael's success too. She wiped her eyes with her napkin. But watching you at the dinner party last week, seeing how impressed our friends were with your cake and your stories, I realized something. The things I thought were important, the expensive food, the perfect table setting, the carefully managed conversation, none of that mattered as much as the authenticity you brought to the evening. I was surprised by her honesty, and by the genuine emotion in her voice. Those people didn't remember the tiramisu I bought from the bakery, she continued. They remembered your homemade cake and the story about learning to make it during difficult times. They remembered your dignity in the face of their questions about your background. She looked directly at me for the first time all evening. I accept your conditions too, Evelyn. And I want to do better. I want to learn from you instead of trying to manage you. The conversation continued for another hour, working through specific situations and expectations. It wasn't easy, there were moments of defensive anger and hurt feelings on all sides. But by the time I prepared to leave, I felt like we had reached a genuine understanding. One more thing, I said as Michael walked me to the door. I want to start having Emma and James over to my apartment sometimes. Not for babysitting emergencies, but for grandmother time. Baking cookies, doing art projects, hearing stories about their father's childhood. They would love that, Michael said, and his smile was the first genuinely happy expression I had seen from him all evening. Emma's piano recital was Friday evening at 7 o'clock in the school auditorium. I arrived early, dressed in my best dress and carrying a small bouquet of flowers for my granddaughter. Michael and Lisa were already there, saving seats in the third row. When they saw me, they waved me over enthusiastically, no reluctance, no whispered warnings about behavior. "Grandma Evelyn," Emma called out when she spotted me from the stage where students were warming up. Her face lit up with pure joy, and she played her piece, the Little Mockingbird song I had taught her, with more confidence and musicality than I had ever heard from her. After the recital, we all went out for ice cream at a family restaurant near the school. The conversation was easy and natural, filled with praise for Emma's performance and plans for James's upcoming birthday party. As we were preparing to leave, Lisa did something that surprised me. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Evelyn, I have a favor to ask," she said. My defenses went up immediately, expecting another financial request or demand for childcare. "What kind of favor?" I asked carefully. "Would you teach me to make that chocolate cake? The one you brought to the dinner party?" I blinked in surprise. "You want to learn to bake?" "I want to learn to make things from scratch the way you do," she said. "I want Emma and James to have those kinds of memories, their mother actually cooking real food, not just ordering from expensive restaurants or reheating prepared meals." "I would love to teach you," I said, meaning it completely. We scheduled our first baking lesson for the following Saturday afternoon. Over the next few months, my relationship with Michael's family transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The changes were small at first: phone calls that weren't requests for favors, invitations to dinner that didn't come with behavioral warnings, genuine questions about my opinions and feelings. Lisa and I developed an unexpected friendship through our baking lessons. She was a quick learner and genuinely interested in the domestic skills she had never been taught growing up. More importantly, she began asking me about Michael's childhood, about family traditions she wanted to incorporate into their home. "I realize I never really tried to understand where Michael came from," she told me one Saturday as we waited for a batch of my mother's dinner rolls to rise. "I was so focused on where we were going that I never appreciated the foundation we were building from." Emma and James started spending every other Saturday at my apartment, what we called Grandma Days. We painted pictures and baked cookies and worked on jigsaw puzzles. I told them stories about their father's childhood, about their grandfather Harold, about our family history that went back generations. But the most significant change was in Michael himself. My son began calling me regularly, just to check in. He started asking for my advice on parenting decisions and career choices. He even began talking about Harold, sharing memories of his father that he had never mentioned before. "I think I was angry at Dad for dying," he told me one evening when he had stopped by to help me with a leaky faucet. "And I was angry at you for getting older, for needing things from me when I felt like I already had too much to handle." "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I told him. "Being an adult with responsibilities is hard. But that doesn't mean you get to transfer your stress to the people who love you." "I know that now," he said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure it out." The financial boundary I had set held firm, and I was surprised by how much relief it brought me. Without the constant worry about whether I could afford the next family emergency, I found myself sleeping better, feeling less anxious about my own future. I used some of my remaining savings to make small improvements to my apartment: new curtains, a comfortable reading chair, art supplies that allowed me to pursue the painting hobby I had discovered. For the first time in years, I was spending money on myself without guilt. I also started volunteering at a community center near my apartment, teaching basic literacy skills to new immigrants. It was work that felt meaningful and used skills I had developed over a lifetime of reading, writing, and problem solving. The other volunteers were mostly women around my age, widows and empty nesters who had found purpose in service to others. We became a close-knit group, supporting each other through health scares and family dramas and the ordinary challenges of aging in America. "You seem different than when you first started here," said Margaret Chen, a retired teacher who had become one of my closest friends. "Happier, maybe. More settled in yourself." She was right. I did feel more settled, more confident in my own worth and less dependent on other people's validation. 6 months after that difficult family dinner, I invited Michael, Lisa, and the children to my apartment for a Sunday meal, the first time I had hosted them in my own space in over 2 years. I cooked Harold's favorite pot roast, made from scratch with vegetables from the farmer's market and served on the good china that had been wedding gifts 43 years earlier. The apartment was small for 5 people, but we made it work, with Emma and James sitting on cushions on the floor and everyone laughing at the coziness of it all. After dinner, Lisa helped me with the dishes while Michael and the children worked on a jigsaw puzzle in the living room. "Evelyn," Lisa said as we stood side by side at my tiny kitchen sink, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" I asked, continuing to dry the plates she handed me. "You were right about everything. The way we treated you, the way we took advantage of your generosity, the way I tried to hide you from our social circle. It was all wrong, and I'm ashamed of it." She handed me another plate, not meeting my eyes. "But more than that, I want to thank you. Standing up to us, demanding better treatment, it forced us to examine our own behavior and our own values. We're better people now because you refused to accept less than you deserved." I set down the dish towel and looked at her directly. "Lisa, we all make mistakes in how we handle relationships. What matters is that we learn from them and do better going forward. I want Emma and James to grow up knowing their grandmother as the strong, dignified woman you are," she continued. "Not as someone who can be pushed around or taken advantage of. I want them to understand that respect is earned through character, not through money or status." From the living room came the sound of James cheering about finding a puzzle piece, followed by Emma's giggle and Michael's deep laughter. "They already understand that," I said. "Children see truth more clearly than adults do. They've always known who I really am. And so do I now," Lisa said quietly. "I'm grateful for that lesson, even though it was hard to learn." As they were preparing to leave that evening, Emma ran back into the kitchen where I was putting away the leftover food. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Of course, sweetheart. Are you happy now? I mean, last year you always seemed sad when you came to our house. But today you seem, I don't know, like yourself." Out of the mouths of babes. My 8-year-old granddaughter had seen what took the adults months to understand. "I am happy," I told her honestly. "I'm happy because I learned something important about standing up for myself and asking for the respect I deserve." "Good," she said with the satisfied tone of someone whose world has been set right again. "I like you better when you're happy." After they left, I sat in Harold's old chair by the window, watching the evening light fade over Lake Michigan. In the distance, I could see the lights of the downtown skyline beginning to twinkle, the same view that had comforted me through 40 years of joys and sorrows in this apartment. I thought about the woman I had been 13 months ago, scared, lonely, financially depleted, and desperate for any scrap of attention from my only child. I had been willing to accept disrespect, manipulation, and emotional neglect rather than risk losing the people I loved. But in trying to hold on to them by making myself indispensable, I had actually been losing myself. And paradoxically, it was only when I stopped trying to buy their love that I began receiving genuine affection and respect. Setting boundaries hadn't cost me my family. It had given me back my dignity and created space for healthier relationships to grow. The changes in Michael's family weren't the only transformations in my life. My volunteer work at the community center had introduced me to a network of interesting, engaged people who valued my contributions and sought out my company for reasons that had nothing to do with money or convenience. I had also rekindled old friendships that had been neglected during the years when all my emotional energy was focused on managing family drama. Ruth Morrison, my neighbor from the apartment downstairs, had become a regular companion for museum visits and afternoon movies. We had known each other casually for years, but we became close friends once I stopped being too preoccupied with family problems to notice the interesting person living one floor below me. "You know," Ruth told me one Thursday as we walked through the Chicago Botanic Garden, "I always thought you were nice but kind of intimidated by life, if that makes sense. Like you were always worried about disappointing someone." "I probably was," I admitted, stopping to admire a display of late-blooming roses. "But this version of you is so much more confident. You have opinions about things, and you're not afraid to share them. You make plans for yourself instead of waiting for other people to include you. It's like watching someone wake up." Ruth was right. I had been asleep for years, sleepwalking through a life defined by other people's needs and expectations. The process of demanding better treatment from my family had awakened something in me, a sense of my own worth that didn't depend on external validation. I started taking classes at the community college, art history, creative writing, basic computer skills that helped me navigate the modern world more independently. At 73, I was learning new things and meeting new people and discovering capabilities I didn't know I had. The painting hobby that had started as a way to pass time during my recovery from family drama had evolved into something more serious. I joined a group of amateur artists who met weekly in a church basement near my apartment, sharing techniques and critiquing each other's work with gentle honesty. My paintings weren't museum quality, but they were mine, expressions of a perspective shaped by 7 decades of joy, loss, struggle, and growth. I painted landscapes from memory, portraits of Emma and James, still lives featuring objects from my years with Harold. One painting in particular captured something important about my journey. It showed a figure standing on a bridge at sunset, looking back toward a city skyline but with her face turned toward the light ahead. The bridge represented the choice point I had reached in my relationship with my family, the decision to stop accepting poor treatment and start demanding better. Michael saw the painting during one of his visits to my apartment and stood studying it for several minutes. "Is that supposed to be you?" he asked. "In a way," I said. "It's about moving forward without losing sight of where you came from." "I like it," he said quietly. "It reminds me of something Dad would have painted, back when he had time for art." That comment opened a conversation about Harold's unfulfilled dreams, about the creative pursuits he had set aside to provide for our family, about the importance of making time for the things that feed your soul rather than just pay your bills. "I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize I only ever worked and worried," Michael said. "I want Emma and James to see me pursuing things I'm passionate about, not just things I'm obligated to do." It struck me that my decision to stand up for myself had given Michael permission to examine his own choices and priorities. By refusing to enable his financial dependence on me, I had forced him to take full responsibility for his family's lifestyle choices. And by demanding respectful treatment, I had shown him what healthy boundaries looked like in practice. The ripple effects of that difficult conversation at the dinner party were still spreading outward, creating positive changes none of us could have predicted. 1 year after Emma's piano recital, the first family event I had attended as a welcomed guest rather than a managed obligation, Lisa called me with an unexpected request. "Evelyn, I have something important to ask you," she said, her voice nervous but determined. "What is it, dear?" I had grown comfortable with Lisa's requests because they were no longer demands for money or unpaid labor. These days, she asked for recipes, parenting advice, or help with small household projects, requests that made me feel valued rather than used. "Michael and I have been talking, and we want to make some changes in how we handle our finances. We've been living beyond our means for too long, depending on credit and loans to maintain a lifestyle we can't really afford." I listened carefully, curious about where this conversation was headed. "We want to downsize," she continued. "Sell this big house and move to something more reasonable. Put Emma and James in public schools instead of private ones. Learn to live within our actual income instead of the income we aspire to have." "That sounds like a wise decision," I said, meaning it. "The thing is, we're going to need help figuring out how to live more modestly. You and Harold raised Michael on a fraction of what we spend each year, and he had a good childhood, a solid education, everything he needed to succeed." She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Would you be willing to teach us how to do that? How to live well without spending a fortune? How to make a modest income cover all the necessities and still have money left over for savings and occasional treats?" I was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what she was asking. This was my daughter-in-law, who had once been embarrassed by my working-class background, asking me to share the financial wisdom I had learned through decades of careful budgeting and creative problem-solving. "I would be honored to help," I said finally. "But I want to make sure we're clear about something. This isn't a temporary arrangement until you get back on your feet financially. This is about changing your relationship with money and consumption permanently." "I understand," Lisa said. "And I'm ready for that change." We both are. Over the following months, I helped Michael and Lisa navigate the process of simplifying their lifestyle. They sold their Lincoln Park house and bought a smaller home in a middle-class neighborhood closer to my apartment. Emma and James adjusted to public school with minimal complaints, finding that they enjoyed the diversity and energy of their new classrooms. Lisa learned to cook from scratch, to shop with a budget, to find entertainment that didn't require significant spending. Michael discovered that he could be successful at work without needing expensive clothes and luxury cars to project the right image. The children, who had always been sweet-natured, seemed to thrive in their more modest environment. Without the pressure to maintain appearances, the family relaxed into a more authentic version of themselves. "You know what's funny?" Lisa told me one Saturday as we worked together in her new, smaller kitchen, preparing a meal that cost a fraction of what their old entertaining budget used to be. "I thought I would miss the big house and the expensive lifestyle, but I don't. This feels more real, more sustainable." "Harold and I always said that the best things in life don't come with price tags," I replied, watching Emma and James play in the backyard with a cardboard box that had captured their imagination more completely than their expensive electronic toys ever had. "I used to think that was something poor people said to make themselves feel better," Lisa admitted. "But now I see what you meant. The things I remember most fondly from my childhood weren't the expensive vacations or designer clothes. They were simple moments with family, creative projects, conversations that lasted late into the evening." My relationship with money had also evolved during this period. With no family financial emergencies to fund, my small savings account had grown steadily secure. I was comfortable for the first time in years, able to afford small luxuries for myself and generous gifts for my grandchildren without anxiety about my future security. More importantly, I had learned to value my own financial independence as a form of freedom. The money in my account represented choices, the choice to help family members when I wanted to rather than when I felt obligated, the choice to spend on things that brought me joy, the choice to feel secure in my own ability to take care of myself. On a warm spring evening, almost 2 years after that difficult family dinner, I hosted a small celebration in my apartment. Emma had won second place in a citywide art contest with a painting I had helped her create during one of our grandmother days. James had successfully completed first grade with excellent grades and glowing reports from his teacher about his kindness toward other children. The adults, Michael, Lisa, Ruth from downstairs, Maria Rodriguez, and Margaret from my volunteer group, sat around my small dining table sharing pizza and affordable wine. The children sat on the floor with their own pizza slices, chattering about summer vacation plans and whether they would be allowed to stay up late enough to watch a movie. Looking around at this group of people who had become my chosen family, some related by blood, others by affection and shared experience, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with external achievements or acquisitions. This was what happiness looked like, not perfect, not wealthy, not particularly sophisticated, but real and sustainable and built on mutual respect and genuine care. I want to propose a toast, I said, raising my wine glass. The conversation quieted, and everyone turned their attention to me. 2 years ago, I was struggling with a question that I think many people face as they get older. How do you maintain your dignity and self-worth when the people closest to you seem to view you primarily as a source of convenience rather than a person deserving of respect? Lisa's eyes dropped to her hands, but her expression was thoughtful rather than defensive. I learned that the answer isn't to accept poor treatment in exchange for maintaining relationships. The answer is to demand better treatment and trust that the relationships worth keeping will survive the adjustment. I looked around the table at these faces I knew so well now, these people who had chosen to be part of my life not because they needed something from me but because they valued who I was. So here's to the courage it takes to set boundaries, to the wisdom that comes from experience, and to the love that grows stronger when it's built on a foundation of mutual respect. Cheers, came the chorus of voices, glasses clinking together in my small dining room. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the remnants of our celebration, Emma called from her new bedroom in her family's modest house. "Grandma, thank you," she said when I answered the phone. "Thank you for what, sweetheart?" "For teaching Mommy and Daddy how to be happier. James and I like it better when everyone isn't worried about money all the time. And I like spending more time with you." "I like spending time with you too," I said. "Sweet dreams, Emma." After I hung up, I sat in Harold's old chair by the window, looking out at the lights reflecting on Lake Michigan. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the water, that familiar Chicago sound that had been the soundtrack of my adult life. I thought about making things from scratch. Not just cakes and bread and homemade meals, but relationships, priorities, entire ways of being in the world. For too many years, I had accepted the prepackaged version of family relationships that Michael and Lisa offered me, convenient for them, unsatisfying for me, but easy to maintain as long as nobody asked too many questions about whether it was actually nourishing anyone involved. But just like learning to bake from scratch, building authentic relationships required starting with basic ingredients: respect, honesty, reciprocity, genuine care. It required time and attention and willingness to let things fail if the recipe wasn't working. The relationships I had now weren't perfect, but they were made from scratch. They were built consciously, with intention and care, using skills I had developed over a lifetime of learning what worked and what didn't. At 74, I was still learning. Still growing. Still discovering new things about myself and what I was capable of creating. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Thanks for tonight, Mom. I love you." I smiled and texted back, "I love you too, son. See you Sunday for James's birthday party." There would be homemade cake at that party, chocolate with bourbon frosting, made from scratch with love and served without apology to anyone who wanted to taste what authentic sweetness could be. And if anyone needed a reminder about where this family came from or what we valued most, they would find it in the careful way we measured out ingredients, the patient way we waited for things to rise, and the joy we took in sharing something real and homemade and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. That's the thing about making things from scratch, whether it's cake or relationships or an entire life lived on your own terms. It takes longer than the packaged version. It requires skills that many people never bother to develop. It's messier and more unpredictable, and sometimes it fails completely. But when it works, when you achieve that perfect balance of flavors, when every element contributes to something greater than the sum of its parts, there's nothing in the world that can match the satisfaction of knowing you created something beautiful with your own hands, using recipes passed down through generations and wisdom earned through experience. I'm still that woman who lives in Edgewater, still taking the red line downtown when I want to visit museums, still climbing 3 flights of stairs to my apartment where Harold's chair sits by the window overlooking the lake. But I'm also someone who learned, at 72 years old, that it's never too late to demand better. Never too late to value yourself enough to walk away from relationships that diminish you. Never too late to discover that dignity is not negotiable and respect is not optional. Life can break you down if you let it. Family can drain you dry if you allow it. Age can make you invisible if you accept it. But if you find the courage to say no more and mean it, if you insist on being valued rather than just useful, if you remember that love without respect is just manipulation with better marketing, then you can remake yourself at any age. You can learn to paint at 73. You can make new friends at 74. You can teach your own adult children how to live within their means and still be happy. You can build relationships based on mutual care rather than financial necessity. You can make a chocolate cake that impresses sophisticated dinner guests. And you can serve it with pride, knowing that every ingredient was chosen with care and every step was completed with the kind of patience that comes from understanding that the best things in life are worth the extra effort. Most importantly, you can look at yourself in the mirror and see someone worthy of respect, not perfect, not wealthy, not young, but valuable in ways that go deeper than any bank account or social status. That's what I want you to remember if you're facing something similar in your own life. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been accepting crumbs when you deserve a place at the table, if you've been buying love with money or service or endless patience with poor treatment, you deserve better. You have always deserved better. And it's never too late to start insisting on it. Have you ever lived through something like this? Have you known someone who struggled with family members who took advantage of their generosity and kindness? Please share your story in the comments below. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in these experiences can give us the courage to make necessary changes. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own worth or gave you hope that difficult relationships can improve when we have the courage to demand better treatment, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these important truths. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting at their kitchen table, wondering if they deserve more than scraps of affection, and they need to hear that the answer is yes. You deserve more. You have always deserved more. And you have the power to create it, one boundary at a time, one difficult conversation at a time, one homemade cake at a time. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to share what I learned about dignity, family, and the courage it takes to value yourself enough to demand better. Now go make something beautiful from scratch, whether it's a cake, a relationship, or an entirely new way of moving through the world with your head held high. You're worth the extra effort. You always have been.